Alright, brain video. Response video to the modern mystic. So we'll play a little bit of his video just to get a feel for it.
It's got no relevance for you, the human being. The fact that you're conscious that the system, your system, the system that is your brain, the brain, is conscious about what it just thought is irrelevant. It doesn't make your loving or logical any more. It doesn't make it any more than the dogs, the wildebeest, or really the white blood cell. Does it?
Okay, that's probably enough. Comparing all of these things is just, because it has behavior, it's all the same. It doesn't make any differences. I mean, it's all the difference, really, so I don't see any point in doing that. The distinction between humans and other mammals is obviously language. Okay, it's not the feelings they feel. It's not the fact that they think. They just don't do it as well as we do it, because we're able to do this language thing that we can learn, and we can have much better, more complicated word associations and even theme associations. So we can recognize more complex things in environments. We can recognize the chessboard, and we can see that somebody's manipulating somebody, or somebody's in danger, or somebody. We can see a much more elaborate picture than the other mammals, because we have language and are allowed to relate concepts to concepts. The difference between mammals and white blood cells is almost too big a difference to even bother explaining the difference. Brain versus no brain. Yeah, they don't have a brain. It's a different reflexive mechanism entirely, and shouldn't even be part of the conversation. So I will draw a picture, and we'll do it that way. The fact that consciousness is not a active player, that's an important point. But the fact that we have more elaborate active parts than other organisms is important. And the fact that we certainly, the feeling creatures, the sensate creatures, have more elaborate reality than a white blood cell is just the most important thing in the universe. Alright, anyway, so this will be the way we'll start. There's the brain. Okay, so this is where what we call senses goes in. Okay, and we just call them senses. So I'm not going to bother with 5 senses. Maybe there's 20 senses. Doesn't really matter. That part's irrelevant. That part really doesn't matter. And the stuff is happens out here. There's stuff we sense. So we could just draw that as stuff happening. The squiggly lines. Stuff is happening. We sense the stuff that's happening, and so the stuff that's happening, let's just keep this in regular pen, and then I'll do the things the brain adds in different colors, hopefully. So stuff happens, and it affects us through our senses. So let's just do this part. You see stuff, you feel stuff, you touch stuff, you taste stuff, whatever, you hear stuff, okay, and it comes into this broad thing called your senses. And your senses don't do anything. Okay, your senses are connected. Your ear is connected to your brain. Your eyes are connected to your brain. All the senses are connected to your brain, and your brain creates something. And what your brain simply does, not just simply, but does 2 things. It creates 2 kinds of things. It creates a first reaction that you could call feelings. So we're going to do feelings in orange. And so it has a reflexive reaction that can have lots of nodes to it. Lots of different aspects to it in terms of what it's recognizing here. So it sees something in this pattern that's 3 dots, and it recognizes 3 dots, and then it creates an emotion, a feeling. And these are always qualitative. So just put a big Q here. They're feel good, feel bad kind of sensations the brain creates. The other thing the brain creates is another image. So it creates thoughts, which are images, are associations, are things we've heard before, or words. So this can be, this reaction is probably takes longer, probably is more involved, but this can be a representation of words, or are just pattern recognition. So it sees patterns. We can say, what else could we say that's doing? Associations. So it associates things it sees here with things it's seen before. So I'll just put some squiggly stuff over here. So it's seen squiggly before, something reacts, it gives you an impression, and it feeds that back into your consciousness. So your consciousness is actively being fed with feelings, of pain and pleasure, PP. Yeah. And it's being fed other images that may, like this image will come in, and it'll augment our image and associate this squiggly thing with, say, a past harm. So this could be associated with a past harm, and that will trigger in the brain this image. When this thing comes floating through here, then it will trigger one of these orange things, because it's a past harm. It's associated with a feeling, and so we'll feel the feeling we felt the last time that was recognized, and so we'll have that emotional reaction of the past will be brought into the present, and that you might call empathy or sympathy or fear, those kinds of emotional reactions. And then when these feelings come in, the brain says, how do we deal with this feeling? The feeling's not pleasant. We feel unsafe. We feel insecure. And the brain then searches for patterns it has, memories, schooling, education, other elements of what it's acquired in terms of these reflexes of recognition of ways to solve the problem. So it comes up with strategies, the very complex reflexes going through the brain, blah, 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 blah. And it comes up with ideas that might work, images of a future where we evade the problem, and that way then that comes in here, this method of evasion, and then that affects the emotions, and now the emotion changes from something that might have been negative to now a positive feeling to compensate. So I don't have enough colors to mess with that, but this could be a bad emotion, and this could be a good emotion. Feeling good, feeling bad. So we can make ourselves feel more secure, everything's going to be okay because I have an idea. And so that creates another emotion that feeds this loop. So the consciousness isn't doing anything. The consciousness is just sitting here watching the brain produce reflexive reactions. And you could argue that this is kind of the intuitive part of the brain, these emotional reactions, and this is the more time you think, that's this blue stuff, trying to find memories and associations and methods and schemes. So this is where the logic is that the mystic is discounting, and this is where the emotions are, which are just complex. Complex would be the wrong word. They're obviously complex because our brain produces them, creates them, manifests them. But they're just this knee-jerky kind of thing. They're not very complicated. They're looking for simple things that your brain reacts to. Blood, things that will cause blood to ooze out, or things that will cause squishing harm, or your emotions are looking for something simple, and your brain produces associations where it sees something very complex, and it knows that very complex, like it could see a Humvee going 50 miles an hour down the road, and it could see the complex idea that it goes spiraling off the road and hits a tree, and then our emotions are really just reacting to the image of the thing hitting the tree. So they're kind of crudely based. So this is all the feedback. So the only part he got right in his video was he used the word feedback. And And yeah, that's all that's happening inside your brain, is your brain is producing stuff and feeding it back into the sense mouth. So the reality is still coming in. Okay, reality comes in as through the senses. Your imagination creates more reality. Your emotions create more reality. So they just richen and deepen the reality that you're perceiving, and it's re-reacting to the new reality you're creating. So you're basically looking at a screen, like this screen image of him, and your brain puts a little Hitler mustache on him, or your brain puts a peep in his mouth. Your brain can do all kinds of things to this basic image. In terms of its understanding, it can recognize it's wearing eyeglasses, and it says, "Oh, silly hat again." So, silly hat. And that's what it's doing. It's creating more on top of this image. So this image creates visceral reactions. Kind of uptight. Cranky guy. Different little sensations are popped in, and then thoughts are popped in about the relevant features, like what's with the hat. It's okay, but it is kind of creepy. That kind of thing. It's just adding more flavor to it's just reacting to what it's recognizing. And Hawthorne just made like a troll video, arguing that somehow I'm not allowed to say something I'm just saying when I want to re-paraphrase or restart an argument, getting back to the premises of the argument. And somehow that's not the appropriate way to transition. And people have lots of transitions. They go like, or they say, there's some other word they use. And yeah, we can recognize that stuff and be annoyed by it sometimes, or we can just say that's irrelevant what you're using to transition from one point to another point. But that's all part of whatever's going to happen inside the person's brain. I mean, they're either going to, be a troll, or they're going to be a sensible, reasonable person. Their reactions are going to be, retarded or obnoxious based on what kind of connections are inside of their brain in terms of understanding, processing, and understanding the rules of logic and what is or isn't important, and the fact that what complexity they have here. There's like understanding of the word formula. That formula is just a description of relationships, and you can recognize the thing that created the reality you're looking at, the formula that created it, and then you can have a thought about formulas and other formulas that might match this formula. It's like electricity has the same basic formula, in terms of its activity, its function, as gravity. So the mass relationship between mass and the application of the force is the same ratio as it is in gravity, even though the force itself is much stronger. It's the same formula. So anyway, but that's like I said, that just depends on whether you have something complex like that. Will depend on whether that feeds back into your consciousness. And again, all these emotional things are your conditioning. So as a kid, you're conditioned to, one of your teachers wore, I always use this example, but if you had a snarky, crappy, evil teacher and she wore a yellow hat, the yellow might always be tainted by the yellow hat teacher. And so every time you see yellow, the brain's going to react with this negative emotion brought up from the fact that, yellow's dangerous because bitches wear yellow. And that's going to end up being your emotional character, your subjective sensibilities, your conditioning. And those feelings are still going to have to be dealt with by your present mind. So you'll have these old feelings come into the new present. Your brain will have to create some kind of rationalization or some sort of statement that says, never mind, that's old bullshit, yellow's fine, and then your brain will say that. Then that'll trigger a reflexive reaction that creates a calming or a compensating relaxation emotion, because you've somehow negated it. you know, and so emotionally you start to recondition your brain through that reinforcement. But it's really two brains in a sense, one creating these motivating feelings that you have, and the other brain trying to figure out strategies to fix the feelings. And so reality comes in, you paint it with emotional color, then your brain sees the emotional color, reacts to saying what's a personal strategy, but it can also just do high logic, and it can also just do real thinking about it, and just keep doing thoughts, and just kind of cut off the emotion. So when you're thinking about mathematics or physics or something else, sometimes you're not having any emotional feelings at all, because you're just busy riding this feedback loop, just riding concepts and associations and words. And so the difference for a human being is human beings can spend a lot of time in here, in loops of logic and thought, and they can also spend a lot of time in here where they're watching a movie, let's say, and they might not be doing a lot of high-minded thinking, they might be just doing a lot of fantasizing, and they're becoming part of the movie, and they're just emotionally reacting. And so the difference for humans is, the key difference is language, because language allows humans to do concept association, so they can understand much more complex things. They can recognize a whole nick. They can understand the concept of hat, the concept of glasses, the concept of a beard and a mustache. They can associate that with all kinds of different things, characters from history, you know, all kinds of complex things it can be associated with, where animals can't, mammals of course can't do, other mammals can't do that. And if they could acquire enough words, it's speculated that they would start to acquire a human type intelligence. And that's sort of part of this primate studies with sign language, is the limitation is that they can't quite get enough words, so they get stuck in like a Helen Keller position. Helen Keller, early in her instruction, was learning a lot of signs, but wasn't understanding that the signs were words representing things in the world, and so it wasn't a language. So she was getting good at mimicking, but she really wasn't understanding. And it wasn't until she put it together, till her brain recognized, oh, we're speaking a language that represents the reality, that she was free or liberated to think in more complex ways. And that's the difference between us and the other mammals. They're having very active lives, imaginations going and logic's going, but it's limited because it can't do complex formulatic. It can't see the formula in people or in like a movie. It can't look at a movie and say, oh, that's just a redo of Shakespeare's, you know, fourth play or something. They can't do those associations, and we can, and that's the distinction. But the distinction in terms of their qualitative life, this emotional life, isn't much different than our own. Their emotional life is limited because they don't have as rich a fantasy life, but it's clearly they do have this relationship between their imagination and what they're trying to accomplish and what they'd like to have happen, and this reality that comes in and this emotional reaction to it. So their life is rich in its emotions and in thoughts. It's just not as high intelligent in the sense of it doesn't have the conceptual associations. It doesn't understand that everything has properties, and that the properties allow you to place it in a category, and then once it's in a category, that becomes a property. So the category could be stuffy, and then we could notice that this guy has some of these things that might fit the category of stuffy, and we put him in the stuffy category. So stuffy is not only a category that he's in, but it's also one of the properties he now has, is membership in the stuffy category. Now that kind of stuff a dog can't do, and we can. And we can do it because we have language. Yeah, so this really does spell it out enough, right? So consciousness is not a player, It's all reflexes back here that create this input into our sense perception. So the emotions come in, the images and thoughts and the representations and symbolic language words come in. And they are language words. Actual words come back into our consciousness, and our brain reacts to the words. Because the words represent categories, and categories represent properties. So I say stuffy over here, and maybe this guy's face will pop up. Yeah, he might be the poster child for the stuffy category. He might be, but there might be somebody else. You know, who knows? Moses or something. Anyway, yeah, so that's really enough. So, till the next time, but I just don't see, on its very face, there's none of this is happening inside of a white blood cell. A white blood cell is just navigating chemically through the world. It's not doing anything electrical, and it's just, as it navigates, it hits chemistry. The chemistry activates other chemistry in its body, and that chemistry points it in a direction. So it's just chasing it's like one of those funky trains that only has one rail, you know, and the train kind of bounces off the middle rail, you know, it's like a guide rail, and it just kind of hits the guide rail. It's just a kind of a sloppy directional system, and that's basically what they're moving based on. So there's no brain, there's none of this emotions, feelings, none of these sense organs, none of this complex reflex. And again, the mystic is just completely negating the significance of this event horizon of consciousness. He's saying these feelings are nothing because they're just neural activity. And I'm saying, as a conscious being, it would be silly for me to call what I feel the same thing as me writing the word feeling. The word feeling, mechanically me writing it, and me actually feeling, are very different things. And I think it's just silly to negate the significance of conscious experience as an event in the universe. It's more than its parts. I mean, I don't like going there, but the truth is that this part of your brain saying feeling, you know, as just a word, is very different than this part of your brain actually manifesting sensation that creates the urgency of desire and repulsion. These are powerful incentives created in consciousness that create what can be a very negative circumstance. Somebody in dire and intractable pain is in a dire circumstance. It is not an irrelevant circumstance. It is not a white blood circumstance. It's a dire circumstance when they are being flooded by intractable, repulsive sensations. It's a significant event in the universe when something is experiencing that. And it's just silly to negate it, in my opinion. Silly, it's almost evil to negate it as a meaningful event. Okay, enough. Till next time.